11, line 1. The Death of Orpheus. By such songs as these, the Thracian poet was drawing the woods and rocks to follow him, charming the creatures of the wild, when suddenly the Ciconian women caught sight of him. Looking down from the crest of a hill, these maddened creatures with animal skins slung across their breasts saw Orpheus as he was singing and accompanying himself on the lyre. One of them, tossing her hair till it streamed in the light breeze, cried out, "See, look here! Here is the man who scorns us," and flung her spear at the poet Apollo loved, at the lips which produced such melodies. Her weapon, tipped with leaves, left its mark, but did not wound him. Another picked up a stone and hurled it at Orpheus, but even as it flew through the air, it was charmed by the blending harmonies of voice and lyre, and fell at his feet, as if to ask pardon for so daring an assault. None the less, the women's rash attack increased in violence till all restraint was lost, and maniac fury had them under its sway. All their weapons would have been rendered harmless by the charm of Orpheus' songs, but clamorous shouting, Phrygian flutes with curving horns, tambourines, the beating of breasts, and Bacchic howlings drowned the music of the lyre. Then at last the stones grew crimson with the blood of the poet, whose voice they did not hear. The first victims were the countless birds, still spellbound by the voice of the singer, the snakes and the throng of wild animals, the audience which had brought Orpheus such renown. The frenzied women began by seizing upon these. Then with blood-stained hands they turned upon Orpheus himself, flocking together just as birds do if they see the bird of night abroad by day. It was like the scene in an amphitheater when, for a morning's entertainment in the arena, a doomed stag is hunted down by dogs. Hurling their leaf-decked thyrsi, made for a far different purpose, the women launched their attack on the poet. Some threw sods of earth, others tore branches from the trees, others again flung stones. To provide real weapons for their mad intent, it happened that there were oxen plowing in the fields, and not far off sturdy farmers were digging the hard ground, toiling and sweating to secure their harvest. When the farmers saw the horde of women, they fled, leaving their implements behind, so that hoes and heavy rakes and long mattocks lay scattered about the deserted fields. Savagely the women seized hold of these, tore apart the oxen which threatened them with their horns, and rushed once more to the destruction of the poet. He stretched out his hands towards his assailants, but now, for the first time, his words had no effect, and he failed to move them in any way by his voice. Dead to all reverence, they tore him apart, and through those lips to which rocks had listened, which wild beasts had understood, his last breath slipped away and vanished in the wind. The grief-stricken birds, the host of wild creatures, the flinty rocks and the woods that had so often followed his songs, all wept for Orpheus. The trees shed their leaves, and with bared heads mourned his loss. Men say that the rivers too were swollen with their own tears, and naiads and dryads tore their hair, pulled on black garments over their fine robes. The poet's limbs were scattered in different places, but the waters of the Hebrus received his head and lyre. Wonderful to relate, as they floated down in midstream, the lyre uttered a plaintive melody, and the lifeless tongue made a piteous murmur, while the river banks lamented in reply. Carried down to the sea, they left their native river, and were washed up on the shore of Lesbos, near Methamna. Here, as the head lay exposed on that foreign shore, its hair dripping with beads of foam, it was attacked by a savage snake. But Phoebus at last appeared, and checked the snake in the very act of biting, turning its open mouth to stone and petrifying its gaping jaws. The ghost of Orpheus passed beneath the earth. He recognized all the places he had seen before, and searching through the fields of the blessed, he found his Eurydice, and clasped her in eager arms. There they stroll together side by side, or sometimes Orpheus follows, while his wife goes before. Sometimes he leads the way and looks back, as he can do safely now, at his Eurydice. However, Bacchus did not allow this crime to go unpunished. He was distressed at losing the poet who had sung his mysteries, and immediately all the Thracian women who had watched the wicked scene were fastened to the ground, there in the woods by means of gnarled roots. The god drew out their toes as far as each had followed Orpheus, and thrust the tips down into the solid earth. Just as a bird, finding its legs caught in the hidden snare of some cunning fowler, beats its wings when it feels itself held, and tightens the bonds by frightened fluttering, so each of the women, as she became rooted to the spot, went mad with fear, and vainly tried to flee while the tough root held her fast, preventing her attempts to pull herself away. Each one of them, as she looked for her toes, her feet and nails, saw wood spreading up her shapely legs. When she tried to smite her thighs in token of her grief, she struck against the bark of an oak tree. Their breasts, too, and likewise their shoulders turned to oak. Their arms appeared to have been changed into long branches, as indeed they were. It was no illusion. Even this was not enough for Bacchus. He abandoned the very fields of Thrace, and with a band of more seemly revelers betook himself to the vineyards of his beloved Tmolus, and to the river Pactolus, though it was not then rich in gold, or envied for its precious sands. He was attended by his usual throng, satyrs and bacchants, but Silenus was not there. For Phrygian peasants had captured him as he tottered along on feet made unsteady by age and wine. They had bound him with chains of flowers, and taken him to their king Midas, who had once been instructed in the Bacchic mysteries by Orpheus from Thrace, and by the Athenian Eumolpus. When Midas recognized him as one who was the god's companion and partner in his mysteries, he celebrated the arrival of such a guest with continuous festivities for 10 days and nights on end. On the 11th day, when Lucifer had shepherded away the flock of stars on high, the king came to Lydia in great humor, and restored Silenus to his young ward. The god was glad to have his tutor back, and in return gave Midas the right to choose himself a gift, a privilege which Midas welcomed, but one which did him little good, for he was fated to make poor use of the opportunity he was given. He said to the god, "Grant that whatever my person touches be turned to yellow gold." Bacchus, though sorry that Midas had not asked for something better, granted his request and presented him with this baneful gift. The Phrygian king went off cheerfully, delighted with the misfortune which had befallen him. He tested the good faith of Bacchus' promise by touching this and that, and could scarcely believe his own senses when he broke a green twig from a low-growing branch of oak, and the twig turned to gold. He lifted a stone from the ground, and the stone likewise gleamed pale gold. He touched a sod of earth, and the earth, by the power of his touch, became a lump of ore. The dry ears of corn which he gathered were a harvest of golden metal. And when he plucked an apple from a tree and held it in his hand, you would have thought the Hesperides had given it to him. If he laid his finger on the pillars of his lofty doorways, they were seen to shine and glitter, and even when he washed his hands in clear water, the trickles that flowed over his palms might have served to deceive Danae. He dreamed of everything turned to gold, and his hopes soared beyond the limits of his imagination. So he exulted in his good fortune, while servants set before him tables piled high with meats and with bread in abundance. But then, when he touched a piece of bread, it grew stiff and hard. If he hungrily tried to bite into the meat, a sheet of gold encased the food as soon as his teeth came in contact with it. He took some wine, itself the discovery of the god who had endowed him with this power, and adding clear water mixed himself a drink. The liquid could be seen turning to molten gold as it passed his lips. Wretched in spite of his riches, dismayed by the strange disaster which had befallen him, Midas prayed for a way of escape from his wealth, loathing what he had lately desired. No amount of food could relieve his hunger. Parching thirst burned his throat, and he was tortured as he deserved by the gold he now hated. Raising his shining arms, he stretched his hands to heaven and cried, "Forgive me, Father Bacchus, I have sinned, yet pity me, I pray, and save me speedily from the disaster that promised so fair." The gods are kind. When Midas confessed his fault, Bacchus restored him to his former state, cancelling the gift which, in fulfillment of his promise, he had given the king. "And now," he said, "to rid yourself of the remaining traces of that gold which you so foolishly desired, go to the river close by the great city of Sardis. Then make your way along a Lydian ridge, traveling upstream till you come to the water's source. Then, where the foaming spring bubbles up in great abundance, plunge your head and body in the water, and at the same time wash away your crime." The king went to the spring as he was bidden. His power to change things into gold passed from his person into the stream and colored its waters. Even today, though the vein of ore is now so ancient, the soil of the fields is hardened by the grains it receives, and gleams with gold where the water from the river moistens its sods. Midas, hating riches, made his home in the country, in the woods, and worshipped Pan, the god who always dwells in mountain caves. But he remained a foolish person, and his own stupidity was to injure its owner again, as it had done before. There is a mountain, Tmolus, that rises steep and sheer, looking out over a wide prospect of sea, and sloping away on either side to Sardis on the one hand, and to little Hypaipe on the other. There Pan was boasting to the gentle nymphs, singing them his songs and playing some trivial tune on the reeds joined by wax that formed his pipes. As he did so, he had the audacity to speak slightingly of Apollo's music compared with his own, and entered into unequal competition with the god in a contest to be decided by Tmolus. The elderly judge took his seat on his mountainside and shook his ears free of trees until only an oak wreath encircled his dark hair, with bunches of acorns hanging at his hollow temples. He looked at the god of the flocks and said, "The judge is ready." Pan struck up an air on his rustic pipes, and with his wild strains charmed Midas, who happened to be near at hand when he was playing. After hearing Pan, the worshipful Tmolus swung around his head to face Phoebus, and as his gaze moved round, his forests followed. Apollo had wreathed his golden hair with laurel from Parnassus. His flowing robes dyed with Tyrian purple swept the ground. In his left hand he held his lyre, inlaid with jewels and Indian ivory. His plectrum was in his right. His very stance was that of a musician. Then he plucked the strings with skillful fingers till Tmolus, enchanted by the sweetness of the melody, bade Pan admit his pipes inferior to the lyre. Everyone else agreed with the verdict of the venerable mountain, but not Midas. He objected to the decision, declaring it to be unjust. The Delian god would not allow ears so foolish to retain their human shape. He lengthened them, filled them with bristling gray hairs, and made them movable at the point where they joined the king's head, so that they could twitch. The rest of Midas' shape remained human, for he was condemned to lose only this one part, but he was made to assume the ears of a lumbering ass. Now the king himself, ashamed of his disfigurement, was anxious to conceal it, and tried to do so by wrapping his head in a purple turban. But the barber who used to trim his long hair saw what had happened. Eager though he was to tell what he had seen, he did not dare to reveal the shameful secret, and yet he could not keep quiet about it. So he went off and dug a hole in the ground. Then he whispered softly to the earth he had dug out what kind of ears he had seen on his master's head. Throwing the earth back again, he buried the information he had given, and after filling in the trench, went quietly away. But a thick carpet of trembling reeds began to push up on the spot, and at the end of the year, when they were full grown, the reeds betrayed their gardener, for when stirred by the gentle south wind, they uttered the words that had been buried, and revealed the truth about his master's ears. Apollo, when he had taken his revenge, left Tmolus and journeyed through the clear air, but stopped short of the narrow strait of Helle, Nephele's daughter, and alighted on the plains of Troy. There, on the right of the Sigean promontory, and to the left of the Rhotean, stood an ancient altar, sacred to the thunderer of Panomphe. And from there the gods saw Laomedon, beginning to raise up the walls of his new city Troy. He saw, too, that the great task the king had undertaken demanded no small resources, and that it was proceeding with much toil and difficulty. So, along with the god who bears the trident, the father of the swelling seas, Apollo disguised himself as a mortal, and on receiving a promise of gold in return for the city's defenses, built the walls of Troy for the Phrygian tyrant. The work stood complete. The king, however, refused the gods their price, and, as a crowning piece of treachery, falsely swore that he had made no such promise. "You will be sorry for this," cried the king of the ocean, and directed all his seas to the shores of miserly Troy, flooding the earth till it was indistinguishable from the waters, sweeping away the farmers' possessions, and overwhelming the fields with his waves. Nor was this punishment sufficient. He further demanded the king's daughter, Hesione, as an offering for a sea monster, and the princes had already been chained to the hard rocks when Hercules rescued her. He had been promised horses as a reward, but when he asked for them, in spite of the fact that he had performed so great a service, he was refused his prize. He therefore vanquished Troy and captured the walls of the city that had been proved false for a second time. Telamon, who had joined Hercules in this campaign, did not leave the district without due honor, for Hesione was given into his possession. Peleus, who had also helped, was already distinguished by having a goddess for his wife, and was no less proud to claim Jupiter as his father-in-law than as his grandfather, for he was not the only man who had had the good fortune to be Jove's grandson, but he was the only one to have a goddess for a wife. It happened in this way. Aged Proteus had said to Thetis, "Goddess of the waters, conceive a child. You will be the mother of a young hero who, when he has grown to manhood, will surpass his father's deeds and will be called greater than he. Because of this, in case the world should own anything greater than himself, Jupiter had avoided any intimacy with the ocean goddess, even though he had felt the flame of passion burning hotly in his heart. He ordered his grandson Peleus, the son of Aeacus, to become her lover in his stead, and enjoy the embraces of the sea maiden. There is a bay in Hyemonia, curved like a sickle, and enclosed by jutting arms, where there would be a harbor if the water were deeper, but the waves just cover the surface of the land. It has a firm shore, free from seaweed, where the sand retains no footprints, and yet does not clog one's steps. A grove of myrtles grows close by, thick with variegated berries, and in its midst there is a cave, whether made by nature or by man is hard to tell, but it is more like man's handiwork. Thetis used often to come there, unclad, seated on a bridled dolphin, and there Peleus found her as she lay sound asleep. When he had tried to win her by his pleas and being rejected, he wound both his arms round her neck and prepared to use force. Had the goddess not had recourse to her wonted tricks, repeatedly changing her shape, he would have achieved his daring purpose. As it was, he held on to her firmly when she changed herself into a bird, and when she became a stout tree, he clung to the tree trunk. But the third shape she adopted was that of a spotted tigress, and terrified by this, the son of Achilles relaxed his grip upon her body. Then he poured offerings of wine on the waters, and with entrails of sheep and fumes of incense, ceaselessly entreated the gods of the sea, until the Carpathian seer spoke from the depths of his pool, saying, "Son of Achilles, you will gain the bride you seek, if you catch her in your snares and bind her fast, while she lies sound asleep in the rocky cave, knowing nothing of what is happening. Do not let her trick you, though she assume 100 false shapes. Whatever she may be, hold her tightly till she returns again to what she was at first." When he had said this, Proteus submerged his head in the sea, letting the waters close over his final words. The sun was sinking, and the chariot slanting down the sky was close to the western sea, when the fair Nereid again made her way to the rocky cave and lay down on her usual couch. Then Peleus seized the nymph's limbs in a firm grip. Scarcely had he done so when she began altering her shape, until she realized that her body was securely clasped, her arms stretched wide on either side. Then at last she gave a deep sigh. "It is not without heaven's aid that you have beaten me," she said, and revealed herself as Thetis. When she confessed her true self, the hero embraced her, obtained his desire, and filled her with child. Her son was the mighty Achilles. Happy in his wife and happy in his son was Peleus, a man whose life had been all prosperity, apart from his wicked murder of Phocus. But because he was guilty of shedding his brother's blood, he was driven from his father's house. The land of Trachis took him in, a kingdom which was then being ruled peaceably and without bloodshed by Syx, the son of Lucifer. The king's face retained the shining brightness of his father's countenance, but at that time he was sad and unlike himself, since he was mourning the loss of his brother. When Aeacus' son arrived in this land, worn out with traveling and troubles, he entered the city with a few companions, leaving the flocks and herds which he had with him in a shady valley not far from the walls. As soon as he was given a chance to approach the king, he went forward, holding out in supplication an olive branch draped with fillets, and explained who he was and from what family he came. The only thing he concealed was the crime he had committed. He lied about the reason for his exile, but asked the king to give him refuge either in his town or in his country. The ruler of Trachis answered him kindly and said, "It is open even to ordinary people to enjoy the opportunities my country has to offer, Peleus. The kingdom I rule is not unfriendly to strangers. Such being our normal attitude, you give us further good reasons to welcome you, for you bear a distinguished name and have Jupiter as a grandfather. Do not waste time in entreaties. You will receive all that you ask. Call whatever you see here your own. I only wish you might see something better." And he burst into tears. When Peleus and his friends inquired what occasioned such violent grief, he replied, "You know the hawk which lives on what it can plunder and terrify all other birds. You may perhaps think that it always had wings, but in fact it was once a man, Daedalion by name. He too was all fierceness, for character never changes, ferocious in war and ready for violence. We were both sons of the star who summons dawn, and who is the last to leave the sky, but I honored peace, and my thoughts were centered on preserving it, and upon my wife, whereas my brother found his delight in cruel warfare. He subdued kings and nations by his valor, that valor which now, in a different shape, sets Thisbe's doves aflutter. Daedalion had a daughter, Hesione, a girl of 14, who being ripe for marriage and endowed with rare beauty, had 1,000 suitors. Now Phoebus and Maia's son Mercury chanced to be returning, the one from his beloved Delphi, the other from the summit of Selene. They both saw the girl at the same moment, and both at the same moment fell in love. Apollo deferred his hopes of enjoying her love till night-time, but Mercury, impatient of delay, touched the girl's face with his rod that brings slumber. At that potent touch she lay still, and suffered the gods' violent embrace. Then, when night had scattered the heavens with stars, Phoebus, disguised as an old woman, enjoyed the pleasure which another had had before him. In the fullness of time, Hesione bore twins to the winged-footed god, an artful child, Autolycus, who was up to all manner of tricks, and accustomed to turn black to white and white to black, a true son of his crafty father, and to Phoebus a son, Philemon, renowned for his singing and playing of the lyre. Yet what good did it do her to have borne 2 children, to have found favor with 2 gods, to be the daughter of a brave father, or the granddaughter of a shining star? Or is it in fact a curse to be distinguished? It has done harm to many, and it certainly harmed her. She had the boldness to prefer herself to Diana, and criticized the goddess's looks, whereupon Diana, roused to fierce wrath, took revenge. "You will find no fault with my actions," she cried, and without delay bent her bow, shot an arrow from the string, and pierced with her shaft the tongue which had so well deserved it. That tongue fell silent. No sound, none of the words she attempted to form, issued from the girl's lips. As she was trying to speak, life and blood drained from her together. Sadly I gathered her into my arms, with all a father's grief in my own heart, and spoke comforting words to my dear brother. But the bereaved father heeded them as much as reefs heed the murmurings of the sea, and he bitterly lamented the daughter he had lost. When he saw her body ablaze on the pyre, 4 times he tried to rush into the heart of the flames. 4 times he was driven back. Then he dashed off in a frenzied flight like a bullock whose neck, rubbed tender by the plow, is tormented by stinging hornets. He charged away where there was no path. Even then he seemed to me to run faster than a man, and you would have thought that his feet had wings. So he fled from us all, made swift by his desire for death, till he reached the summit of Parnassus. There Apollo took pity on him, and when Daedalion threw himself from a towering rock, turned him into a bird and bore him up, to hover on the wings which he had suddenly acquired. The god gave him a hooked beak, and curving crooked talons, but left him his one-time courage and strength greater than his body. Now as a hawk, showing mercy to none, he exercises his cruelty against all other birds, and suffering himself is become the cause of suffering to others.